Hello, and welcome to the C2Learn video, Building a Computer. In this video, we're going to venture under the hood of a personal computer. After watching this video, you'll have a basic working knowledge of the different components of a PC. You'll learn where those components are located inside the computer, and you'll be able to ask for them correctly when shopping for new components. You'll then learn how easy it is to install those components. You will be able to save a substantial sum of money by building a computer yourself, rather than paying thousands of dollars for a store-bought computer. You will also be able to save money when it comes time to perform simple upgrades to your computer. We have divided this video into 4 parts. Part 1 is an overview of the basics. You'll see each of the main components that make up a computer, and you'll learn about the different options available to you when buying new components. In Part 2, you will see some options of where and how to purchase the components that you need to build your computer. Then you'll learn how to assemble all the components and build the PC. In Part 3, you'll learn how to boot up your new computer, and you'll learn how to configure the BIOS. Finally, in Part 4, you'll learn how to prepare the hard drive and load the operating system. So let's get started. This is Part 1, Computer Essentials. In looking at the computer, we'll divide this part into 4 sections. The heart of the computer, the CPU and motherboard, storage devices, input devices, and output devices. A personal computer is a tool in which we can use to accomplish many different tasks. Just like a car, which most of us use to drive down the road, when we get into a car and drive around, we really don't think about the technical details in which go into making a car run. When we're driving down the road, we're not focused on the fact that there's a complex motor churning away under the hood. Many of us use a computer the same way we do a car. We learn how to do some basic tasks without thinking too much about what's under the hood. What we're going to do in this video is get under the hood, so to speak, of a personal computer so that you can see exactly what's going on. We'll start with the heart of the computer, the CPU and motherboard. We'll remove the motherboard and CPU so we can take a closer look at them. Just as a car has a motor, which is what generates power so you can get to where it is you want to go, so a computer has a central motor too. In the computer, that motor is the CPU or central processing unit. In a car, the motor generates power. In a computer, the CPU is really more like a brain. It is the core of the computer system and is nothing more than a thin wafer of silicon located on the motherboard here. From here, the CPU, or brain of the computer, does all of the billions of calculations which must be done so users like us can do all the tasks we wish to do. The CPU is also like a general of an army, as it directs the various components of the computer to do different tasks, and it does all of this with mind-boggling speed. Now, the technical aspect of how all this is accomplished is really not what's on the minds of most computer users. What most users want to know is, how can I get done what I need to do faster? When we talk about the speed of the computer, we're talking about the CPU, and the speed is measured in hertz. Every 1 gigahertz is equal to 1 million hertz. Generally, Yesterday's CPU will be plenty fast for most of the tasks you'll need to perform, so buying the fastest chip sold today is really a matter of convenience and budget. Now we'll take a look at the foundation of the PC, the motherboard. The motherboard is like the chassis or frame on a car. All the cards and adapters will allow the various components to talk to the CPU are mounted here. While a chassis on a car serves as a simple support or foundation, a motherboard is different in that it also serves as an intermediary between the CPU and the various devices. Data travels along the motherboard through the various circuit chips and connectors. Now on the motherboard, we have a collection of different kinds of connectors. Let's take a tour of each one. This is a 34-pin floppy connector to connect the floppy drive to the motherboard. These are enhanced IDE connectors. They have 40 pins and are used to connect the DVD-ROM and/or hard drive to the motherboard. You will notice one is labeled IDE 1 or primary, and the other is IDE 2 or secondary. Primary is where you connect your hard drive if you are using an IDE hard drive. Secondary is where the CD or DVD-ROM drive will plug into. These are serial ATA connectors used for connecting serial ATA hard drives and any other serial ATA compliant device. These are PS2 connectors. One is used to connect a PS2 keyboard, and the other is used to connect a PS2 mouse to the motherboard. These are SPDIF connections for through optical fiber to digital multimedia devices. Some boards will have a serial ATA RAID connector for attaching external hard drives, as shown here. This is a parallel connector. It is used to connect printers, desktop cameras, or scanner to the motherboard. If your motherboard has onboard audio, then you will have an array of plugs, as shown here. These are generally used for connecting speakers, microphones, and any other line-in and line-out audio devices. This is a universal serial bus, or USB. It is used to connect a USB camera, printer, keyboard, and mouse to the motherboard. It allows much higher data transfer rates than parallel or standard serial port. If your motherboard has onboard Ethernet, like shown here, then you will have an RJ45 port. You may also find several internal connections that support IEEE 1394 connections for digital media, such as camcorders and any other 1394 type of device. Also, additional serial ATA external RAID connections, and even the original serial port usually used on COM1. Now let's look at the PCI slots. This is the PCI bus. It's an expansion bus used to connect video cards, sound cards, network cards, and any other PCI compliant card to the motherboard. These are PCI Express X16 slots, which are replacing the older A-gap slots. It's also a much higher data transfer rate for higher performance graphical display applications. Some motherboards support dual SLI video cards. Check with your motherboard specification for more details. This is the PCI Express X4 slot. which is used for connecting SCSI devices or network cards. When you buy a motherboard, one of the most important considerations is the CPU you will be using. There are many different types of CPUs, and each require a specific socket. Whether you are buying an Intel or AMD CPU, they will both plug into the matching socket or slot the same way. CPUs were made in square shapes known as sockets, as well as oblong shapes known as slots, like this older slot A. Both AMD and Intel prefer to sell the square socket version as to eliminate the cartridge housing needed on the slot types of CPUs. Socket types are cheaper to make, eliminating the cartridge, saving production costs. Each type of CPU and the socket must match, as they will require a specific socket layout and count of pins. A sample would be the socket 939, made for the AMD 64 dual core. The CPU will have 939 pins to match the 939 holes on the socket. So with this in mind, the most important thing to know is what type of chip you have, because the chip will have to correspond to the socket on the motherboard. You certainly don't want to get all set up and ready to build your computer to find out that your CPU won't plug in to your motherboard. For a list of CPU updates, please visit us on the web at www.c2learn.com/updates. Here you will find a definition on the most current CPUs today. Well, that takes care of our overview of the CPU and motherboard. Let's move on to Section 2, Storage. All computers need storage devices, places to store programs and information. Some are permanent, like hard drives. Some are removable, like floppy drives, CD, or DVD-ROM drives. And some are temporary, like RAM. In the computer world, we use the term memory to refer to data stored on chips, like RAM. We use the word storage to mean data that is stored on disks or tape. We'll begin with the main storage device, the hard drive. If the CPU is the brain of the computer, the hard drive is the big closet. Or using the analogy of a car, the hard drive is like the trunk. Basically, the hard drive is a small box with a little magnetic disk inside, which stores data. The size of hard drives is measured in bytes. 1 gigabyte will equal 1 million bytes. When you buy a hard drive, there are several types to choose from: IDE, SCSI, Serial ATA 1 or 2. The basic level IDE drive is a 7200 RPM drive. This drive is great for entry-level PCs, since it will run on the ATA 100 IDE channel, which carries data at 100 megabytes a second. It's also a great value. When buying a hard drive, it is important to be aware of the term ATA. ATA stands for Advanced Technology Attachment and refers to an implementation where the disk controller is integrated into the hard drive itself. There are several versions of ATA and all refer to the basic speed of the hard drive. Older ATA33, which transfers data at 33 megabytes per second. ATA66, which transfers data at 66 megabytes per second. And finally, ATA100, which transfers data at 100 megabytes per second. The standard level is ATA100. The important thing to understand is that most motherboards support ATA100 drives. There are several things to be aware of when installing an ATA66 or ATA100 hard drive. Ultra ATA100 is backwards compatible with all ATA66 systems. But if you use ATA100 in an ATA66 configuration, the speed on both drives will be limited to ATA66. If you are using an ATA66 drive, it is recommended you install it on the secondary IDE channel with your DVD or CD-ROM drive. If you place an ATA100 on the same IDE channel as an ATA66 drive, performance will be greatly reduced. A SCSI hard drive is faster and more efficient than an IDE drive, but it is also more expensive than an IDE drive. SCSI drives are generally used in a server environment and not typically used for workstations or your average computer user. Next is Serial ATA. What is Serial ATA? Serial ATA stands for Advanced Technology Architecture, which is an interface that is used to connect hard drives and other peripherals to a PC. It is the next generation replacement for Parallel ATA, physical storage interface, and will be used to connect storage devices such as hard disk drives, DVDs, and CDRWs to the motherboard. Why has Serial ATA been developed? The Advanced Technology Attachment, known as ATA, interface, previously called Integrated Drive Electronics, known as IDE, has existed in substantially the same form since 1989. As PC processor performances has increased, so have the read and write data rates of hard disk drives. The disk rate is projected to exceed today's 100 megabytes per second interface bandwidth. Parallel ATA data transfer bandwidth is nearing its limit, and therefore becoming a performance bottleneck. Serial ATA has been developed to eliminate this bottleneck by initially offering 150 megabytes, and in the future it will provide significant headroom for future improvements. In other words, Serial ATA is scalable and allows future enhancements to the computing platform. Serial ATA allows the performance and growth to continue without adding costs and extraordinary means to achieve this requirement. How does Serial ATA compare to the Ultra ATA 100? Ultra ATA 100 was the latest generation Parallel ATA interface. With its maximum burst data transfer rate of 100 megabytes per second, it superseded the Ultra ATA 66 interface. Before the industry completes its final transition to Serial ATA, Ultra ATA 100 is the last Parallel ATA interface. So why should I migrate from parallel ATA to serial ATA? Parallel ATA's 5-volt signaling requirements limits other system performance improvements. Since the industry continues to reduce chip core voltages, parallel ATA's 5-volt signaling requirements is increasingly difficult to meet. Parallel ATA has 26 5-volt signals per ATA channel, requiring the use of large physical chip pads to accommodate the high pin count. The large pads will ultimately dominate the chip as the chip sizes are reduced. With the parallel ATA interface, the 18-inch cable length limitation can be a serious issue as well. The limited cable length complicates peripheral expansion choices, making some internal drive configurations impossible to implement. Of course, this depends on PC chassis size and the design and location of internal media bays. The wide, flat ribbon cable of the parallel ATA bus are difficult to route, and their shape and bulk can restrict airflow and can create hot spots inside the chassis. With parallel ATA, data robustness has long been a standing issue. During its early development, no form of data checking was designed into the parallel ATA interface. What are the actual benefits I will see from serial ATA? Faster data transfer rates beginning with 1.5 gigabytes per second and scalable up to 4 times and beyond. Reduced system voltage requirements, thinner data cable, longer length cable up to 1 meter, smaller pin counts for a much more sleek design, increased error checking and correcting, 100% compatible with your existing ATA software drivers which run on any standard operating system. And last, serial ATA drives no longer require jumpers. The hard drive mounts into the case here and plugs into the motherboard labeled Primary Master, located here if you are using an IDE hard drive. If you are using a serial ATA hard drive, then you will plug into the serial ATA port shown here. So while all computers need a large trunk to store data, sometimes a large trunk is not necessary. Sometimes all you need is a small place to put data. In a car, we have a glove box to place small items into. In computer terms, this is where the CD or DVD disc comes into play. If you're working on a document in a word processing program and need to save it, you can save it on a CD. Just like throwing a written paper into a glove box in the car. You could save the document on the hard drive, but with a CD or DVD, you can take the document with you to work on in another computer. Now a CD or DVD disc has a lot in common with the cassette tapes we listen to in our car stereos. Both are portable magnetic storage devices. The big difference is that a cassette tape only allows linear or sequential access to data. If you want to listen to a song at the beginning of the tape, when you are in the middle of the tape, you have to wait while the tape rewinds. A CD or DVD disc, however, allows random access, which means you can go to any point on the disk to retrieve information. One CD-ROM can hold up to 650 megabytes. That's quite a bit compared to the older 1.44 megabytes that a floppy disk holds. A newer type of CD-ROM that holds up to 4.7 gigabytes of data, enough for a full-length movie, is the DVD-ROM. DVD-ROM stands for Digital Versatile Disc, or Digital Video Disc. Many experts believe that DVD discs called DVD-ROMs will eventually replace CD-ROMs, as well as VHS video cassettes and laser discs.
I'd like you to call me at midnight.
The DVD specification supports discs with capacities up to 4.7 gigabytes and larger.
What you expect, is it?
One of the best features of DVD drives is that they are backwards compatible with CD-ROM drives.
Do you feel that?
This means the
Something's
DVD
off.
player can play old CD-ROMs, CDR discs, and video CDs, as well as DVD-ROMs. The CD-ROM or DVD-ROM drive mounts into the case here and plugs into the motherboard labeled Secondary IDE located here. If you are using more than one DVD-ROM drive, then you will set one as primary master and the other as secondary master. You can have them both on the same IDE ribbon. Not all memory is permanent, however. Computers need a temporary form of memory to store information to run software. This is done with the use of RAM. RAM is a form of memory, only it is not permanent like data stored on a DVD disc or hard drive. For our purposes, the specific technical aspects of how memory works is not what we're going to focus on. The important thing to understand is that computer data, or the memory of it, is stored on circuit chips, which run on electrical current. And if the electricity is turned off, that data is lost forever. RAM stands for Random Access Memory, which means all the data stored in RAM can be accessed randomly. Unlike our music cassette tape, which is linear and must be rewound to a specific spot on the tape. With the large size of programs created today, it's a good idea to have plenty of RAM. There are several types of RAM to choose from. Ultimately, your personal needs and budget will dictate what you buy. For a current list of RAM to buy, visit our website at www.c2learn.com/updates. Adding more RAM to a computer is quite easy. It simply plugs right into the motherboard here. Before you insert the RAM into place, take a look at the notch on the memory stick. This will allow you to plug it in only one way. If you try to plug it in backwards, you will find it will not line up and plug in. Forcing it can damage your memory stick. Also, if you are installing more than one stick, it is best to use the same type of RAM. Some RAM has single-sided chips and others have double. Most motherboards provide more than one expansion slot. Refer to your motherboard guide on configuration settings. In this case, we are installing two 1 GB modules. We will place these in the blue DIMM slots shown here in the motherboard manual. Well, that takes care of Section 2, Memory and Storage. we looked at how and where we store data in the computer. In Section 3, we'll look at the different ways we get data into the computer. The main way we as users interact with the computer is with the keyboard. A keyboard looks a lot like a simple typewriter, but in actuality, it's much more than that. It's the way we enter data into the computer and the way we tell the computer to do certain things. All PC keyboards must have alphanumeric keys, letters and numbers, punctuation keys, function keys, and special keys, Control, Delete, etc. When buying a new keyboard, the primary concerns are personal comfort and price. Most keyboards connect to the computer using a USB port as well as a PS2 port. You can also buy a wireless keyboard, which frees up any cables that connect between your PC and the keyboard. Now, we will take a look at the mouse. The mouse is a tool which greatly simplifies the way in which we work with the computer. Essentially, the mouse is a tool we use to move the cursor or pointer around on the computer screen. This frees up our hands from having to constantly be on the keyboard. There are various styles of mice to choose from, so again, price and personal comfort are the deciding factors when choosing a mouse. Mice connect to the computer using a USB port or PS2 port. You can also buy a wireless mouse as well, which again will free up any cables between the mouse and the PC. Now let's take a look at the eyes of the computer, the scanner. On its own, a computer does not see pictures or words. So to get them into the computer, we need a device which can convert pictures and words into a language computers can understand. In this case, the scanner scans a piece of paper with text or an image and converts that into dots per square inch and stores that file in a variety of different formats that you can choose. A scanner on its own is useless unless it has software which enables the scanner to communicate with the computer's operating system. Some software is basic and it only allows the computer to receive the scanned information from the scanner. Other software is much more complex in that it can allow you to edit either text or images. Adobe Photoshop, shown here, is an example of a high-end graphic editing program. Another tool you can use to get information into the computer is a camera. You can use a phone camera, digital camera, or USB desktop camera. You can also use portable MP3 players to transfer your MP3 songs to and from your computer. To send large files such as movies and large pictures, you can use an external hard drive. Well, that takes care of the basic ways we input data into a computer. We looked at keyboards, mice, scanners, cameras, and MP3 players. Now we will look at the basic ways we get data and information out of the computer. The monitor, like everything else in the computer, does not work alone. In this case, the monitor needs a graphics adapter or video card to speak to the computer. In a nutshell, the computer sends a stream of data in the form of binary numbers to the video card. The video card converts this digital data into a visual format that you visually see on your monitor. When buying a video card or monitor, the two factors to consider are price and performance. The performance depends on what you do with your computer. Also, it's important that the card and monitor are compatible. Today, video cards support DVI out, which is used for LCD monitors, as well as VGA out, used on older CRT monitors. Older video cards support a VGA connection used for RGB analog out, which is used for CRT-type monitors primarily. CRT-type monitors were large and cumbersome. LCD monitors are thinner, use less energy, and are easier on the eyes. Most LCD monitors support VGA in, so if you plan on upgrading your monitor from a CRT to an LCD before you upgrade your video card, then you can still do so. You can also keep your CRT monitor and upgrade your video card. Just make sure the video card supports VGA out, as most do. Some have a separate VGA out connector, as others will have an adapter as shown here, which converts DVI to VGA connections. Remember, when using a VGA out to an LCD, the quality will be greatly reduced. If you buy a cheap monitor and hook it up to the best video card available, the results will be lousy, and you won't be using the card to the best of its abilities. The important thing is that the card and monitor are comparable in quality. As with buying any computer parts, budget, needs, and personal taste will dictate what you buy. The monitor connects to the computer right into the video card's DVI connector, shown here. As computers and word processing programs have gotten more and more powerful, experts predicted that paper would become obsolete. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. With the increase in printer qualities, we are now using more paper than ever. Essentially, the printer is the device which allows us to make a hard copy of text or pictures we edit on screen. Technically speaking, there's a bit more to than just that. But when buying a printer, the important thing to focus on is what you will be using the printer for. There is a wide variety of printers to choose from, and a wide variety of options and features. Printers vary in print quality, speed, graphics quality, and price. Individual needs and budget will dictate what you buy. We recommend consulting some of the major publications which print detailed reviews about printers every year. PC Magazine is an excellent place to begin. The magazine is also available online where you can view the current reviews about the printers sold today. In the early days of computers, modems were both slow and expensive. Each year, the speed and quality increases while the prices decreased. The modem allows computers to communicate or connect over phone lines. They also allow computers to connect to fax machines. The word modem comes from modulator, demodulator. Basically, the modem converts numbers or digital data into tones which can be sent across a telephone line. When buying a modem, one should consider price, speed of the modem, and whether the modem will be an internal or external. Using an external modem frees up expansion space inside the computer. Today, the most common way we communicate between computers is the use of a network card. What is a network interface card, often abbreviated as NIC? It is an expansion board you insert into a computer so the computer can be connected to the network. Some motherboards already have onboard NIC support. Most network interface cards are designed for a particular type of network, protocol, and media, although some can serve multiple networks. They also can vary in different speeds. Most network cards are backwards compatible with slower speeds. It's a good idea to find out what speed your network is set up for. Next, we have sound cards. As computers today are used more for games, movies, and music, we need a device that converts digital data to sound. A typical sound card includes a sound chip, usually featuring a digital to analog converter that converts recorded or generated digital waveforms of sound into an analog format. This signal is led to headphones or speakers. More advanced designs usually include more than one sound chip and separate between synthesized sounds, usually for real-time generation of music and special effects, with little amounts of data and CPU time, and perhaps MIDI compatibility and digital sound reproduction. Today, SPDIF is more commonly used, as SPDIF is a digital audio format used to transport stereo digital audio signals to CD or DVD players, as well as digital compatible speakers. That concludes the output section. We looked at monitors, printers, modems, network cards, and sound cards. These are all the basic hardware components which make up a personal computer. But there is one key ingredient we need to look at before we conclude, and that is the operating system. The hardware serves to process, move, and store data, but we need commands or software to tell the computer how and when to process that data. Software is really just a list of instructions which sends commands to the CPU, and the main piece of software all PCs must have is an operating system. The operating system makes sure, much like a traffic cop, that all the coming and going of data and commands do not interfere with each other. Beyond the operating system, there are many different types of software programs for the PC. There are word processors for creating and editing documents. There are spreadsheets for keeping track of numbers. There are graphic programs which allow you to do desktop publishing or to manipulate photographs. The variety of different choices in software compares to the wide variety of choices when buying an automobile. Ultimately, the choices depend on your needs and budget, and the best way to learn is get behind the wheel, fire up the engine, and go for a ride. Well, that concludes the first part, Computer Essentials. You saw each of the components that make up a personal PC, and you learned what parts you need to buy in order to build a computer. In Part 2, you will learn about some of the different options you have when buying computer parts. Then you'll learn how to put the parts together. The most conventional way to purchase your parts is at a retail store. This may be the quickest and most convenient way. However, it is probably not the cheapest way to shop. Another way to shop is at the popular computer shows, which appear in most large cities on various weekends. These shows are usually held wherever trade shows and conventions appear. These shows are a little less convenient than marching down to the standard retail store. However, there is one advantage, and that is price. Competition is very stiff at the shows, and that means that buyers like us can enjoy bottom line prices, often much lower than the retail stores. The only drawback is that the store folds up and goes away when the show is over and makes returns a little difficult. This is where online shopping comes into play. By shopping online, you get all the positive benefits of both the standard retail store and the computer show. You have the ability to shop and compare prices 24 hours a day. And since the overhead for an online retailer is often much lower than a conventional store, this means you can enjoy computer show prices all the time. There are many sites to choose from. The luxury of the internet is that one can quickly shop all the options and get the prices very quickly. When you buy online, the product is delivered right to your door. You never have to leave the house to stand in lines or wait in traffic. Before we start shopping, a common question while shopping for parts is, what does OEM stand for? OEM generally means Original Equipment Manufacturer. It is also referred to as an open-ended market, bulk pack, white box, brown box, and gray market. Most computer parts sold as OEM simply mean bulk, which is shipped in a static bag without a retail box. CPU sold as OEM will come with just the CPU and no fan. When buying a CPU processor, it is recommended buying a retail version as the fan will be included. What are some of the OEM computer parts that you can buy? Video cards, network cards, sound cards, and even software. When buying some software, like an operating system, they usually require that you buy a piece of hardware. To help you choose your computer parts, please refer to our buyer's checkoff list found on our disc or on our site at www.ctolearn.com/updates. This checkoff list will serve as a guide on selecting the parts needed to build. Let's begin by walking through the checkoff list step by step. To begin, print out our checkoff list. Whether you are shopping online or in a retail store, the steps will basically be the same. We will use an online retailer in this example. The important part of the computer is the CPU, so this will be the first piece of hardware you will want to decide on. Start by choosing between AMD or Intel. After deciding what brand, then select the speed of the CPU. We recommend not buying the fastest CPU available today, as you will find that in several weeks after buying the fastest CPU, the price will have dropped drastically. Once you have chosen your CPU, write down the speed of the CPU. Then write the socket type that the CPU will require. Next, you will need a fan if you bought an OEM version CPU. We recommend buying the retail version CPU, which will include the fan. Place a check if you bought the retail version CPU, which included the fan. Next is selecting a motherboard. First, write down the CPU socket here, which corresponds to the CPU you chose. Check the following items whether you want onboard audio, onboard network, or onboard video. Onboard video is not recommended unless you are simply building a basic system to check email, surf the web, and create simple Word documents. If the motherboard has onboard audio, you can simply disable that in the BIOS if you plan on buying a separate sound card now or even later. Decide if you want onboard network, which simply frees up your PCI slots. Next, will you be using 2 PCI Express video cards? Last, look for a motherboard that has at least 2 PCI slots as well. 3 is preferred. After selecting your motherboard, you will want to read some online reviews on the motherboard you chose prior to buying. The best way to get some reviews is type the name of your motherboard in the search window and click on some of the reviews and read what others have to say. Next is RAM. You will want to review the motherboard specification on the type of RAM to use. Since programs are getting larger and use more memory, it is recommended buying at least 512 megabytes of RAM. When choosing RAM, you will need to understand several factors before we move on. The speed of the RAM, type of RAM, whether you want error checking or non-error checking, and finally, whether you want registered or unbuffered. Selecting the speed of your memory is determined by the motherboard and CPU you chose. To find out the speed of the RAM you will need, simply refer to your motherboard specification. In this example, this motherboard supports 4 dual-channel DDR400, 333, and 266 with a maximum of 4 GB of RAM. The key note here is DDR400, 333, and 266. We will now go to the RAM list. Here you will look for the type of RAM that meets the speed requirements. We will choose PC3200, which uses the fastest bus speed at 400 MHz. Now let's look at type of RAM. The easiest way to categorize memory is by form factor. The form factor of any module describes its size and pin configuration. Most computers have a memory socket that can accept only one form factor. The module shown in this example is a 184-pin SDRAM module. Next, ensuring the integrity of data stored in memory is an important aspect of memory design. 2 primary means of accomplishing this are parity and error correction code, or ECC for short. What is the difference between parity and ECC? Parity can detect but not correct single-bit errors. ECC is a more comprehensive method of data integrity checking that can detect and correct single-bit errors. Parity is less expensive and is more widely used in PC design today. ECC is generally used in server environments. Finally, choosing between registered and unbuffered Registers and buffers improve memory operation by redriving control signals in the memory chip. They can be external to the memory module, or they can be located on the module itself. For buffering, the process of redriving the signals is called buffering. With buffering, there is no loss of performance. Registered is similar to buffering, except that in registering, the data is clocked in and out of the register by the system clock. Registered modules are slightly slower than non-registered modules because the registering process takes one clock cycle. Most PCs built today are built with unbuffered modules. The most important note is that buffered and unbuffered modules cannot be mixed. Next, choose a case. A mid case will suffice. There are many styles, colors, and sizes of cases. The most important thing about a case is the size of the power supply. You will want to find a case with at least 400 watts of power. You can also buy a case with no power supply and simply buy a power supply separately. This will simply cost a bit more than buying it at a bundled rate. The power should include a 24-pin ATX and a 4-pin 12-volt, unless you are using an older motherboard that supports AT. Write the size of the power supply here. Next, choose your main storage device, the hard drive. Choosing a drive depends on the motherboard. If buying an IDE drive, find out if your motherboard supports ATA66 and ATA100. Also, serial ATA1 or 2, which is the optimal choice to consider. If you are needing a robust drive and choose SCSI, then you will want to find out what controller you have, as the drive's connectors will have to be compatible. Next, hard drive cables. Most motherboards will provide one ATA100 primary ribbon used for IDE hard drives and one ATA66 secondary ribbon used for CD or DVD-ROM drives. If the motherboard supports serial ATA, then they will also include several serial ATA ribbons. If you are planning on using a SCSI drive, then you will need to buy a SCSI controller and ribbon. Next, choose a DVD or CD-ROM player or recorder. A common question is, should I buy 2 DVDs, 1 DVD reader, and 1 DVD writer for making direct copies of CD or DVDs? Again, this will be a personal choice. As a side note, when making copies of DVD or CDs, it is recommended that you record to your hard drive and then to the DVD or CD. Next, you will need to buy an audio cable to connect your DVD or CD to the sound card, which will allow you to play audio CDs. Next is a floppy drive. These, however, are not required if you plan on running Windows 2000 or higher. Floppy drives are becoming obsolete. Your new motherboard should include a 34-pin floppy connector. Next, choose a video card. There are several types to choose. AGAP, which has been replaced by PCI Express, PCI, which is an earlier version, and the newest version is the PCI Express. It all depends what your motherboard supports. Next, a sound card. If your motherboard has onboard sound, then you can save a little money from buying a sound card. If you plan on buying a high-performance sound card, then simply disable the onboard sound on your motherboard. Next is choosing a network card. Check the speed of your network. Most cards are backwards compatible. Next is selecting a hub or router if you plan on connecting more than one computer to your network. Next is modem if you plan on connecting to the internet using a dial-up service. Choose whether you will be using an internal or external. Next, choose a mouse and whether it is USB or PS2. USB is the recommended choice. Next is a keyboard and whether it is a USB or PS2. And again, USB is the recommended choice. Next is choosing a monitor. You may want to wait on buying an LCD now and continue using your older CRT monitor. Just make sure the video card you choose supports RGB out. Next, speakers. Then operating system. And any other extras such as scanner, printer, and USB camera. Now that you have seen the parts you will need and you've seen where to buy them, now you're ready to actually put the parts together.